Hello there, one and all. For those of you watching live, apologies for the slight delay. You know how we like to be punctual on this channel, but never mind. We'll make it up to you. Thank you very much for tuning in to episode 493 of Love at First Scent with me, Persolaise, live on YouTube. And we're doing an interview, the first of our post-summer break interviews. Should be a good one. It will be a good one. It's one that I've been hoping we would be able to do for the longest time. And finally, the stars have aligned and we're doing it. So, in the studio today, very, very kindly giving up his time, is Carlos Huber. When he launched his brand, Arquiste, in 2012, it was immediately met with a tremendous amount of excitement. People were really, really impressed with all of the historical details that went into the stories behind each fragrance. People were very impressed by the fact that the scents were made by extremely talented, high-profile perfumers, none other than Rodrigo Flores Roux and Jan Vanier. People found Carlos himself very, very charming. People also very, very helpfully fell in love with the perfumes themselves. So everything was an auspicious start, and from then things just got bigger and bigger. Since those days, Arquiste has won numerous awards. Carlos and Arquiste have also created scents for other brands by way of sort of collaborations, I guess you would call them. They have added one more perfumer onto their roster, Calice Becker. You may have heard of her as well, and I guess all of this means clearly that Carlos is doing something right. This year, he gives us no fewer than 3 perfumes: A Grove by the Sea, Venice Rococo, and Almond Suede. I expect we'll be talking about those. So let us not delay any further and say live from New York, finally, Mr. Carlos Huber. How are you doing today, Carlos?
I'm very good. I can't believe you used that. I've been wanting to say something like that, live from New York.
Well, live in New York. Well, it's true. And live from New York. And from this, I have to say, I mean, I was kind of being nosy about this interior a few minutes ago when we were just setting up. This beautiful, supremely Arquiste interior. How, I mean, just tell us a little bit about something about that. Now, this is you. Am I allowed to say what this is, where this is?
Yes, absolutely.
So you tell us then. Where are we?
We're at home here in New York City. We're in the West Village, which is where my apartment is. And we're in the living room. Normally, I have a home office that's on the other side of the building, the other side of the apartment. But this is a living room which obviously has a lot of kind of like objects and things that are kind of near and dear. And I love things that tell a story. So that's why you'll see.
Tell us just like about, I don't know, one of them, because they all look like such beautiful things. The thing that's right, is that a painting or a photograph? The one that looks like it's a big tree?
It's actually a photograph. It's actually a photograph. And it's an interesting, well, so it's like a Samsung. It's called the frame. It's the TV in the room. But because we didn't want a TV that would look so obviously like a TV, and we didn't want to cover it up with something, we have this TV that basically you can upload images, or you can upload your own photographs. And that's a photograph of these stables designed by Luis Barragan, which was a very famous mid-century Mexican architect. And it's these stables in Mexico City. And I took that picture, and it looks very painterly actually, but it is a picture. And
trust me to home in on the tech. But anyway, thank you so much for giving up your time, Carlos.
Of course, I'm very happy.
One thing that I didn't want to do today, because time is limited, I didn't want to be one of these interviews where we talk about how did you set up your brand, how did it all happen? Because actually, Arquiste is not like a spring chicken as far as brands are concerned anymore. And also to give Persolaise.com a little bit of a plug, back when you launched, I was fortunate enough to meet up with you a few times, and I did interview you back then. So if anybody would like to sort of see or read the interview that Carlos gave me back in 2014, 10 years ago, I can't believe it, where we did talk about how the brand was created, you should be able to see a link to that in the video description below. And then that link should also take you to a few other bits and pieces of interviews that we did with Carlos. So I would very much more like to talk about the now, or the recent years, the recent creations, where your creative thinking is at. But having said all of that, almost to contradict myself, do you agree that Arquiste isn't a new brand anymore, or to you does it still feel new? Like where do you place yourself in terms of chronology, if I can put it that way?
Well, I think there's it's an interesting game between consistency and reinvention, right? That you need to do when you have a brand, when you're building something. You need to keep things fresh and exciting, and you need to bring more people in, of course, but you also need to be consistent, and you need to be very loyal to your customer base, because of course they are expecting something from you, or they're loyal themselves, and I really, really value that. I think Arquiste is a new brand for a lot of people, because I do think that we're a boutique brand where I don't have partners with me. I don't have outside groups necessarily investing in the brand and everything. It's really my own venture. And so because of that, it's remained relatively compact, let's say, and lean. And that also like comes with certain limitations where, like, I can't do the big activations and the big sort of like advertising that other brands that have maybe more funding behind them, and just that want to explode the way things they do things. I have tried and learned in my own path that organic growth and that consistent growth and that little by little, step by step, things work really well for me. Number one, because I love what I do and I want to keep doing it. And I'm not necessarily looking for an exit from this. This is something that I took. I'm originally an architect, and I basically started this kind of adventure just as a project to because I was passionate about perfume and see where it would take me. I'm happy that it took me where I am now, and I value that immensely. So I don't really want to let go of that, So it's not necessarily that I started this brand in order to then sell it and move on to something else. This is really like a passion.
No, I was going to say you're anticipating one of my questions there. And okay, so that is a good way of looking at it, isn't it? That even though it may not be new for you every day or every week, it might be new.
Yeah. So
for somebody else.
I do think that recently, as also like there's more interest in the perfume. The perfume kind of like base is growing, and there's more exploration on social media. So I am hopeful, and I think a lot of people are discovering it now, and that's always something I'm very grateful for and very exciting. But I that is why, for me, like I said, it's important to be consistent and to be really true to what like Arquiste is meant to be, and to really keep working on like beautiful storytelling, beautiful evocations of time and place, and deliver good quality perfumes, of course. So we've learned a lot. We've had a really fortunate journey. I'm really happy to say that, again, by staying kind of compact and lean and boutique, we've been able to survive a lot of periods of uncertainty that, especially in the niche world, has been just so chaotic. And then I came in 2011, 2012 when I launched. It was a very exciting time in the niche perfume world. It was exploding. It's when everyone started discovering Byredo and Le Labo and Frederic Malle, and suddenly these brands started being acquired by larger groups, and suddenly there was a full explosion into this. But if you think about it, back in the day, there was no social media, hardly, and online really wasn't so much of a channel of distribution and sales. It was a presence, for sure. You needed to have your vitrine online, but people were really buying perfumes in the stores. Like, that's changed a lot now. Of course, stores and the real life experience is still key, but people are exploring at their own leisure, in their own terms, in a very different way. So I think it's like an exciting time, and I'm happy that we are able to sort of like prove ourselves with experience and consistency and value, and at the same time remain exciting and new for people.
No, I think I know what you mean, and to kind of echo what you were saying, I don't normally at this point in the broadcast take comments from viewers, but we'll go with this one because I like it. It's Rachel, regular viewer, saying Arquiste is one of the only brands whose work shows consistent quality and creativity. There has never been a bad Arquiste. Bravo.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate
send
that.
Rachel her check any
That
minute now.
I mean, that is like really, really lovely to hear. And at the end of the day, like I said, like we work very hard on these perfumes, and we believe in them. Now, because this is perfume, it remains subjective at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Quality is quality for sure, but everyone has a different barometer of what that is. And so I try to always remain very positive about this field. I think perfume is a beautiful thing. I think every single perfume out there has a raison d'être, a reason for being, a user, and a specific time to wear it. Even bad perfumes, you know, I still rather the world make perfume than make bad things. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think there's a beauty in here that we should always celebrate, and we should always hype up the good things, and let the things that don't resonate, let them fade, and let them be.
Oh, I get what you mean. Now, we have already got quite a few people tuning in from all over the world, seemingly very, very excited for this interview, which is great. I'm guessing that some of you are going to have questions for Carlos. So regular viewers will know that I always say, save your questions for a little bit later, because if you post them now, then I will probably miss them. So hang on to them for the moment, and we will definitely try to take. Well, yeah, you never know what people are going to ask. Hang on to them for now, and if you would, when you ask your question, if you're able to say where it is that you're watching from, it is always interesting to find out where you're watching from. So with all of that talk of where we're at, why don't we go straight into the present? Like I said, 3 new perfumes this year. The Grove by the Sea that came out I think a few months ago, but I know a few minutes ago we were talking about Armond Suede, which just by total coincidence we've both been wearing today.
Yeah.
So I have a little vial of Armond Suede here. I'm going to spray it and re-smell it. Why don't you take it away and tell us the story of Armond Suede? So where does this take? There you go. Where does this take us in terms of history and place and all the rest of it?
Armond Suede is a fragrance I'm very excited for, because it's my second fragrance with Khalees Becker. Right. Who, of course, is like an icon in fragrance, and I was so excited to work with her. Extremely grateful. And she did Indigo Smoke a few years ago. And for the next perfume, we kept talking about, what her interests are, what my interests are, where we could meet halfway and tell a story that kind of like speaks to both. I wanted to work on something. I've always, being from Mexico, I think we have a link to Spain as well as kind of like the mother country. And I've always learned about like Spanish history in a particular time in the Middle Ages when it was under Moorish rule, where basically 3 cultures coexisted harmoniously. At least that's the way it's presented in the history books, right? And you had the Moors, which were of course Muslim, Christians and Jews, all cohabitating and all living in southern and central Spain. And this is a period in history where a lot of crafts and a lot of knowledge flowed from, the Middle East, North Africa, the Mediterranean into Southern Europe, and then influenced the rest of Europe. So that's actually how through this side of the world, also in a way like the Renaissance came into being in Italy, because Greek and Latin philosophers that were being translated into Arabic were then being read and exposed in southern Spain, and that's how it arrived via this side of Europe and prompted the Renaissance, right? So I've always been like very interested in this. Of course, you have architectural landmarks like the Alhambra in Granada, but then you also have like crafts like leather making in Cordoba, which became a thing. Like the leather craftsmen in Spain became the best leather craftsmen in Europe and would make the most beautiful gloves, which would then be scented, right? So it has like a link to perfume history. And then a lot of food and cuisine and traditions and music like flamenco and all these things like have an influence from this period, right? One of the desserts that I like the most is almond marzipan. And
I'm going to
Spanish
pause you for a second because we have a comment from Oriana. Can you read that?
Yes, exactly. Marzipan turrón. Right. So these types of like nutty, roasted, toasted kind of desserts that are very nutty, almond, and just different kind of like nuts that are used in here, pecans and whatnot. This is a very kind of Spanish tradition. Spanish mazapan, which best quality today is from Toledo. It's very well known. Has this kind of like influence of being just influenced by, again, Arabic desserts, but also traditional Italian and French and Spanish desserts. And it is this mishmash of culture and all that. So Calice is quite good with gourmands, as you may know.
Yeah.
So we talked about different kind of like accords that would be interested for us to play with, inspired by Andalusia and southern Spain, and this kind of like period of crux of different cultures and influences. And she created an accord that was like a bitter almond fragrance that I thought was actually very modern and very interesting. It had a saffron note as well. And it just had this like green kind of bitter punchiness in the beginning that I thought was very interesting. So I told her, you know what, this reminds me of mazapan. It reminds me of marzipan. So why don't we develop the story from there? And as I was like researching and reading about marzipan, another thing that of course I found as one of the crafts that were developed by like the Moors at this time was, again, the leather craft. And there's a thing called Cordoba leather, which was very finely worked, very finely kind of like sort of like hammered, and could be used for decoration in the walls. It could be gilt, it could be made into gloves and different things. And it became the most sophisticated, the most refined leather, right? So I thought that would be interesting for a fragrance. What if we imagine ourselves in a street in Cordoba, and you have on one side a baker or a confectioner that is like creating these like marzipan, and then next door to that is a leather craftsman that is working on leather and has suede and has all these like hides, and what is the combination of these smells and how do they cohabitate? Another thing that Calice is really good at, of course, is this beautiful orange blossom note that you notice in the beginning. It's this tartness, it's this sort of like citrusy tang that I think is really beautiful in here. Almost like it goes really well with like the bitter almond, of course. So so it's a fragrance that, you know, and this is what I love about like development, of course, because, you know, at a certain point you get a modification, we call them, right? Like a specific mod that is more leathery. And then we get one that is maybe more gourmand. And then you kind of see which one is more addictive, which one is more immediate, which one do you reach for? And that's how we ended up deciding on what you smell now. So I'm very excited for this one. It's a gourmand that I think the saffron and the leather in the back gives it just something different, something interesting. Of course, like it reads more sophisticated, but I'm interested in the contrast. I'm interested in like the push and pull from the two facets.
A little bit unusually for you, you've gone for a very, very literal name for it.
Yes, it's a bit more in the nose.
Yeah. So what was the thinking there?
I just thought it was just such a like a clear translation of the scent that it was a little bit hard not to like it. It was, for me, it was like I kept going back to the name. It was very descriptive, and beyond the fact that of course it's very clear the intention and like almost like it categorizes the scent already. I just felt it had like it was appealing to me, and I like that directness. I sometimes like to work with names and stories that are a bit more esoteric, a bit more like you need to research them more, and that's also like really fine. It depends on where I'm kind of feeling. And then this one, I felt like, you know what, this is there's something punchy about it, and the fragrance is punchy.
Yeah.
So
why did it take a while to bring another perfumer into the mix?
You know, the thing about like development for me, and where I've considered myself very lucky, is that I have very close relationships with the perfumers I work with. I consider them friends. I mean, Rodrigo Flores-Ru especially, he's been a mentor and a teacher for me, and he's an integral part of, you know, the story of Arquiste, because he's the one that basically opened the doors. He's the one that like taught me, and, you know, took me under his wing for like over a year, where I was like studying with him every week. And I am lucky that we meet for development at the lab and at his offices, but we may also sometimes meet for dinner or lunch or a birthday party or like a friends get together, and we end up discussing fragrance, and we end up discussing ideas, and we discuss our trips and our inspirations, and inevitably things happen. We started working on things together. I'll describe something. He's like, you know what? I remembered what you told me last week, and I worked on this in the lab today, and I want to show it to you. And then something will happen where we like, well, I guess we have a perfume development in the making, you know? And so with sometimes like we have a lot in sort of like in our sort of like front burner of work that we're doing. So I like, which again, it's like embarrassment of riches a little bit. Like we have to kind of like decide, okay, do we launch this one now, or do we wait a little bit? When is Khalees is coming? When is Rodrigo's coming? What's the story? How do they tie in together? This year, I think, is a special year because I've never launched 3 perfumes around the same time. We did kind of give them a little bit of space. A Grow by the Sea is a very much a Mediterranean summer story, so that launched in June. Really for everyone that wanted to travel to the Mediterranean or the Adriatic and had this kind of idea of that landscape and those beaches and those islands and that coastline in their minds, and what would that smell like. Venice Rococo is also a project that started around the time that we were like developing the Adriatic Croatian story. I was also traveling a lot and visiting a friend in Venice a lot, and learned a lot about Venice, and was sharing this information with Rodrigo, and kind of like the development again kind of casually took us to create the perfume, but not really, because it's something that both of us had been wanting to do. And in the back, and then aside from that, I was already developing an Almond Suede with Khalees. So how
did you meet her? Was it like through the Givaudan connection, or?
Yeah, so so Rodrigo basically trained me as a fragrance developer, and to evaluate with him and to develop. And so he has always been like, he has been at Givaudan since that moment and before that, right? So I've always like worked with Givaudan. I've remained quite like loyal to them. I do think that it's an industry that really values just the bonds and the partnerships that we make, especially over time. And I've learned that it's incredibly, you know, it's nice to work with people that champion you. And it's nice to work with people that protect you and nurture you. So I've always worked with Givaudan. Not that I don't, of course, there's wonderful fragrances out there and perfumers that I think are fantastic, that I would, you know, would be wonderful to work with them. But this is kind of my DNA, right? And so Khalees, Jan, and Rodrigo are all Givaudan perfumers. And it's really through, more than actually through, let's say, like an account executive at Givaudan introducing us, it's really through our like friendships and our network as friends that like this worked out the way it worked.
We know that you do a lot of traveling. I think even years ago, before you started a perfume brand, I know you studied in different parts of the world. Your background is in architecture and historical preservation, and each of your perfumes has got a very, very definite link not just to a place, but also to a specific time in that place, and maybe to a specific incident in that place. So to me, I think your work, your perfumes, can very much be seen as works of bridge building. You know, they are connections to different parts of the world, regardless of whether people choose to delve into the stories. Do you find, in all the traveling that you've been doing in the last few years, do you find that the world is shrinking a little bit? Do you find that, and I mean that in a negative way, do you find that it's harder and harder to get to some places? Or to flip the question on its head, do you think it's actually now more important than ever to build bridges and make connections?
Yeah, I don't think the shrinking is a bad thing, because also we must not take that for granted. It's not a given that it will remain so forever, you know? I think this access to travel and this access to sort of like, to think of like our world as a collection of open societies that are open to exchange and open to bridge building and open to this like meeting is very fortunate, and I think it's a blessing. I think we should always think of connections as a blessing. It doesn't always have to be the case. I mean, I've been in the US, in New York, for over almost half my life. I lived outside of my hometown of Mexico City for more than half my life. I was in Europe for 3 years before coming to New York. I don't take for granted the fact that we must be very grateful and very considerate of our impact in the world and our connection and our ability to understand other cultures. So, you know, there's situation. I mean, years back, there was a moment where I was a green card holder here in the U.S. where, because of the political situation and because of who came into power, they were stopping green card holders at the border and maybe sending them back home. These are people that may have lived half of their lives again, or like a significant amount of time in this host country, that have paid their taxes, that have like created families and created bonds and businesses and everything. And I was quite scared because I was actually in Australia for a work trip, and I was coming back in, and it's when they started stopping green card holders at the border, and sometimes sending them back depending on where they were coming from. Luckily, that didn't happen to me, but it was a very kind of moment to understand that, like, just don't take it for granted. So I think exchange is important. It's also like natural. I think for us to think of each culture as hermetic and like completely devoid of outside influence is very naive. Our entire world is based on exchange. It's based on trade. It's based on fluxes of people, and the meeting point of like cultures and ethnicities and influences and artistic currents. So I value and I treasure this kind of shrinking world, and I think it's a positive thing. I think we should also not take it for granted how lucky we are that we can have more things at our fingertips. In the case of like brands, let's say, and access to, discovering a brand from the US or discovering a brand from Argentina or a brand from Mexico or something from like India. I think that's like a really beautiful, lucky thing that as a generation and as just a society, we're lucky to experience.
Would you ever, or have you ever seen the creation of a perfume almost as a kind of political act? For example, would you ever make a perfume that's inspired by, I mean, I don't know where your interests lie, but, you know, maybe a perfume inspired by Persia, or a perfume inspired by, you know, maybe some other country that is closed off and so maybe could have a kind of way built. Do you know what I mean? Have you ever sort of seen your work in that way?
Well, but in a very sort of like, I always try to make perfumes that kind of highlight, again, these meeting of cultures and this flow and flux of people in trade. Like Nanban is a fragrance that, for example, is about like the commercial and trade between East and West, between the Japanese, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and how they kind of like met and for a brief moment in time kind of exchange a lot of things back in the 17th century. What happened after that, again, to not take it for granted, is that Japan decided not to continue these negotiations with the West and basically closed off its borders for like 300 years, which some might argue was positive for the country. Some might argue was not. So again, I like these stories that kind of like bridge us, that like join us and that like bring us together. And I think especially because perfume, they are formulas, they are compositions made for different ingredients. And the ingredients come from different places. They may come from France, from India, from Australia. They may also come from a lab. They might come from fields. It's all about joining these different facets and making something unique and whole out of them. So that's what I'm interested in. That for me is my political statement, to kind of like bring us together rather than separate and only highlight one thing. Even though I am from Mexico City, and I do consider at the heart for Arquiste to be a Mexican brand in the sense because Rodrigo and I myself are both Mexican, and Rodrigo is such a big part of the fragrances. But I don't intend, and I never intended to be a brand that only spoke about Mexican stories, because that's, for me, my way of being Mexican is more of this maybe global outlook. You know, I even though I don't live in Mexico, I'm still very much tied to my family there, to my connections there, to my world there. And, you know, my family was welcomed into Mexico, 2 generations ago from Eastern Europe. And they were very proud and very just grateful for Mexico to receive them. Now, we didn't grow up with 300 years of family history being back in Mexico. And we are originally Polish and Ukrainian and Lithuanian, but we feel supremely attached to Mexico, and that's what makes us Mexican. So for me, being Mexican is not only talking about pre-Hispanic or Spanish influences. It's so much more than that.
No, that makes complete sense. And I wonder if your heritage also means that you're always kind of like looking beyond simple borders. Now, I cannot believe that we've already been talking for more than half an hour, but it turns out that we have been. So I should say at this point, for those of you watching, that this is a live interview with Carlos Huber, founder of and creative director at, or curator, perfume curator at Arquiste. Quite a few questions coming through. I'm going to start taking them soon. Actually, maybe let's do that, because we really need to not take some of these questions. Sticking with this theme now, let's take this question from Rachel, who says, I really admire how history, culture, the life of the mind show up in your fragrances. Can you talk a little bit about how you narrow down your ideas into definite fragrances?
That's a good question. I mean, for me, it's like the something that piques your curiosity, right? Something that is inspiring, something that like you want to learn more about. Because at the end of the day, I think this is like a story that should interest you and that should inspire you. Our day-to-day is filled with a lot of like routine and a lot of things you do. You wake up, you have a cup of coffee, you go to work, you get on the subway or the train or whatever. And if you can have a little source of inspiration, a little connection to something a bit removed from that routine, a bit more inspiring, a little bit more romantic, let's say, or that can make you travel in your mind, that can make you think of the Adriatic coast, or that can remind you of Venice and a period movie that you saw once. I think these are the stories that for me are the ones that I want to pursue. Again, they either have something that makes you want to transport yourself there through your nose, of course, or something that maybe is a really clever, interesting, like, oh, I didn't know that. I just learned something new. And it's a beautiful thing to then like take with you as you're wearing your fragrance. I don't know. I wonder, and maybe it does happen when people wear one And if they're wearing, like, I don't know, let's say Venice Rococo, and somebody asks them, what are you wearing? They can say, oh, you know what? It's actually very interesting. It's a fragrance based on 18th century cosmetic formulas. How did you find that? It just starts a conversation. It's just something that, like, we should have this extra bits of information in our life to, like, make us, to just make our everyday more vivid and more, like, alive. So I like choosing stories that are inspiring, that are easy to translate into fragrance. I don't want to create things that are, like, then a little bit too hard to comprehend in an olfactive way. They should be an easy translation of ingredients and story. And something, of course, at the end of the day, because we have a collection, I do need to be a little bit mindful to see how that lives within the collection, right? And then what style are we working with? And is this something new? Is this adding to the collection? Or am I repeating myself in something? And that's important to, like, figure out.
No, that makes sense. Now, there's been lots of comments being made as well about samples and discovery sets. Very, very unusually for Persolaise, folks, we have a discount code for you that I don't often find myself saying this, but thanks to the gents at Fiole, if you follow that link, or if you just go to Fiole and put in Persolaise 10 as your discount code, you will get a 10% discount on the Arquiste discovery set. And I'm reliably informed by Fiole that you don't have to be based in the UK to use this. You can also be based in the US and in the EU. That code has been pinned to the top of the chat. So great way to discover the brand. And thank you very much to Fiole for making that possible. You've mentioned the Venetian one a few times. Now that's Rodrigo again, is it?
That is Rodrigo.
Do you want to tell us about, because this is a powder bomb, isn't it? When you first,
it's a powder bomb.
It's like I suddenly feel myself turning into, like, Madame de Pompadour or something like
that.
Which is,
absolutely.
Tell us about this one.
This is a fragrance I absolutely adore. I love powdery fragrances. I love dusty fragrances. It's just very much my comfort, and I think part of, like, my own personal style. And
I'm picturing you now, like, in a Marie Antoinette wig and, like, a, you know, Madonna doing Vogue at the MTV Awards or something. I don't know.
I've had the costume before, let's just say.
Oh, now we need to see the photo of it. Why don't we see that on your Instagram?
Well, no,
yeah, you're blushing, Carlos. Just answer the question now.
It's the blush. It's the powder blush. It's part of the fragrance, you know? It's a fragrance. It's a period in history that I love, just because of all the art, the incredible architecture. This kind of, like, again, this change between Baroque and Rococo, and then going into neoclassical. It's some of the most beautiful architecture in my point of view. I've also studied it a lot. I did a master's in preservation. And within that, I did a course on history and theory of architecture in the 18th century. So I learned a lot about it. And it's a beautiful part of period in history, because it's when kind of, like, modernity starts coming in, and we start thinking of things like convenience and comfort, and people have a little bit more leisure to then become scholars and thinkers and writers. And it's a great period of history for literature, for architecture, for the arts. So one of the fragrances that I've always loved is the smell of baby powder and the smell of just, like, talcum powders. It's been a comfort for me forever. I've always been interested in that. As I've traveled, and I did, like, do a lot of studying in Italy back in the day when I was younger, I loved Italian talcum powders, Italian cosmetic powders that were very floral, that had this, like, candied violet kind of scent, rosy, orange blossom, and of course sort of like that, like, dusty iris and very powdery aldehydic background. So one time, Rodrigo and I were in Italy, in Florence, for one of the perfume fairs there, and we walked into a restaurant, and this woman was wearing this incredible powdery bomb that we were fascinated by. And we thought it was such an Italian thing. We had smelled a lot of, like, these Italian brands and Italian Italians just wearing these like powdery things, and I thought it was like so lovely to hold on to those traditions like in that way. So it made me interested in like researching a bit more where this tradition comes from. What is this like heritage of like baby powders from Italy? And I even learned that like Johnson and Johnson's baby powder, which is of course an American company, very, very popular. Everyone grew up with it. Originally, that scent comes from Italian brands. Okay. So it was the Italian brands that influenced the rest of the world and what we think of as baby powder. And these Italian brands were by themselves influenced by cosmetic and wig powders from the 18th century.
Okay.
So when people would like powder their wig, their face, their entire body, those formulas that were heavily reliant on rose and musk and violet, and they had like different kind of also names for them. One of them was like poudre à la maréchale, which was a French formula that was very famous in the end of the 17th century, beginning of the 18th century and throughout. All of this became what we know today as baby powder. So I thought it was like a really wonderful idea. Now, coincidentally, like that, I've had a very good friend from Venice for over the last 10 years, and he is also an architect and also a preservation architect. So he's in charge of a lot of like restoration and beautiful renovation projects in Venice. And every time we go to see him in Venice, he always takes us behind the scenes of some palazzo or some church or some restoration of a painting that they're working on with the foundation that he leads. And so we've learned a lot about Venice as well. And of course, Venice is this place of, has always been a place of exchange and trade between East and West. And it was also a place during the 18th century when the Republic was a little bit more decadent and maybe trade wasn't as strong as before. It became a tourist destination. So it was an obligatory stop in the Grand Tour where Northern European gentlemen and ladies as well, when they would travel down to Italy to basically culture themselves and visit Rome and Florence and learn about Roman history and learn about the Renaissance, they would then go to Venice to have fun. And they would have places where they would gamble, and they would have balls and parties in palazzos. And one of the things that the nobles there also developed, instead of all the formality of like a ball at the palazzo, they would have basically like pied-à-terres. They would have little apartments in the city where they would conduct their more casual or private business. This could be a meeting with a friend to discuss something, or to gamble, or to read poetry, or to have a mini concert, or to have an affair. And these were
wondering if you were going to get to that part.
Of course. And, you know, that's where you would meet so-and-so, and you would have your little rendezvous. And these they were known as ridotti. A ridotto was basically to gather, to reduce, to like get together. And that's where they would gather to have these little things. So my friend basically took us to one of the remaining ridotti in Venice, which is today the French kind of like lycée, where you would take like French courses in Venice. You
can't make this up. Okay,
you can't make it up. So if you Google like French Institute in Venice, you will find this place, and you can basically buzz them and say, "I'd like to see the room."
Okay.
And if you don't have courses going on, they'll allow you to do it. And it's this beautiful like stuccoed pastel fantasy of cherubs and mirrors and garlands and flowers. And it has peepholes where you could see who was coming in. And it has even like boxes where like the musicians would be hidden from view, but almost like speakers, you would hear the music coming from behind the wall. And all of this sense of privacy and intimacy was kind of the perfect setting for Venice Rococo and for this powder.
The powder is like almost like this sort of veil of disguise for a lot of debauchery.
A veil of disguise for debauchery, and a veil of disguise for a very animalic background, let's say. So
yeah, well, it is, isn't it? Yeah.
In the back of this, we have animalic notes of civet, castoreum, but we also have a very interesting cumin nitrile note that is very, very, very subtle. I would never say that like the cumin is very evident in here, but it's just enough to take you away from the baby powder, to take you a little bit into something a little bit more ambery and sophisticated and naughty in the back.
Yeah, no, and it works. That definitely comes through. Thanks for that. We need to do some quick fire questions because I can't believe where the time is going. How about this one from Dushan, who says, what's your favorite Spanish leather perfume?
Oh my God. I mean, there's incredible, wonderful, like leathery fragrances out there. I have to be honest, the leathers that I'm most like in touch with and that I have more of an opinion, of course, on and everything are the leathers that we've created together.
Yeah.
And for Spanish leather, with Jan Vanier, the perfumer Jan Vanier, we did Infantine Flor, which I wouldn't necessarily call it exclusively a leather perfume, but the Spanish leather accord is very prevalent in there. And again, it's a suede note that is very, very soft. It's what takes the everlasting flower and the orange blossom into a more kind of, again, sophisticated, naughty background. So those are like, and definitely Almond Suede now for me is like probably the most leathery fragrance we've done. And at the end of the day, these are sort of like the leathers that I'm really familiar with and that can really comment on.
That's fine. How about this one from Oriana? Again, you can't answer this quickly, but sorry, you have to. What are your views on transparency of materials used and the respective sourcing in perfumery? I know that that's even more of a hot topic at the moment than it normally is, but
I'll say that like sourcing is very important, and especially sourcing is very important in the effect and the consequences and outcome for the communities that provide these materials, right? So the communities that are working on the extraction or the growing of specific notes or specific flowers or spices, whatever, it's important that they are supported, that we have transparency, and that the work ethic and their work is being compensated fairly. That that all of this, that this industry is giving back to those communities, and that's very important. So sourcing is important.
You essentially, because you
sustainability
use Givaudan, you essentially have to trust that Givaudan are doing what they need to.
Well, that's why I like to work with Givaudan, because they do have incredible sustainability programs with a lot of different communities. They kind of tap into, Haiti needs help right now for vetiver, so let's help Haiti. Let's put money and let's put a little bit of support for development of like vetiver growing and extraction in Haiti. Or same thing with like ylang ylang or like vanilla. Like they go to the sources and they say, okay, this vendor, this supplier is struggling. How can we help? Or how can we make life better for the workers in those fields? So that I think is very important. Transparency in terms of, again, to understand sustainability and conflict-free is really important. I think as well, we want to make sure that ingredients minimize their carbon footprint. I think that's very important. I do also have to say, I do trust that the big houses are under incredible scrutiny, and they are really behind. They are leading like the change in like making sure that just ingredients are like responsibly sourced, that their carbon footprint is reduced, that they are clean, that they are non-toxic. That being said, the whole thing about transparency of a formula, I don't necessarily know that is really being used the proper way. I think it requires a lot of education to really understand the way ingredients are used and the quantities they are used for and the toxicity within that. I think sometimes this is used in the wrong way for marketing to kind of like sort of like create conflict within the industry about which brands are clean, which brands are not. And I think that's being used to some people's advantage rather than to the consumer's advantage.
Speaking of materials and things like that, I was wondering if we could also just literally spend a couple of minutes talking about reformulation, because am I right that this beauty, this is Anima, has had to undergo a change?
Not really a change. So you may know that what happened recently is like an ingredient called Lilia, which had been used in perfumery for a long time and was suddenly prohibited by the European Union by regulation. So basically, the entire industry had to scramble and take this ingredient out of their formulas. So that's what happened with Anima Dulcis. We had to take the Lilia out. That being said, I wouldn't call it a reformulation really, because it was just one specific ingredient that didn't have like it was very easy to change. Like the formula didn't really change at all with what we
okay, so would I not particularly smell a difference if I smelt whatever the current one is?
You wouldn't.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
Listen, there's always a batch. There's always like a difference. Again, like your bottle that has been there with you for, you know,
I mean, it's an original, so yes, that's
will smell differently than like a new batch that has just been like formulated, right? That's really the only difference. You wouldn't really smell any difference just because of the lack of Lilia. And this is something that like most brands.
Did Rodrigo and Jan find like a sort of perfect substitute for Lilia?
Yeah,
I guess depends on I don't want to split hairs, but like if it's changed, then that is a reformulation. But I think I know what you mean.
It's a reformulation because, like, let's say like it has a new, like literally a new number in the system, right? Because we need to make sure to order the one that doesn't have the Lilia. Is it a reformulation in the sense that like there's been a tweak and there's been a conscious artistic or creative interest in changing the formula? No. So in some cases, the Lilia was just easily extracted. The Lilia was maybe something that supported another note, and in this case, it was Lilia is a floral note. In this case, it was something that was more sort of like just like a boost for something else. In this case, it was very easily extracted and replaced with something else that gave it the same effect. So it didn't really change anything. For other fragrances that are more reliant in it, then yeah, you need to find a substitute. But again, this happened to most brands out there. Had fragrances that had Lilia, and
I think almost all brands, didn't they?
Yeah.
Would I be correct in assuming that you have not visited every single one of the geographic locations that's referenced in your perfumes? Because I'm guessing maybe that isn't. Or have you been to every single one of them?
Not all of them. I haven't been to China, which is the Indigo smoke story that we developed. With
have you been to Russia for Aleksandr?
I have been to Russia.
Have you been to that place that you reference in Aleksandr? The question I'm getting to
St. Petersburg, yes.
The question I'm getting to is, does it help if you've actually been to that place?
Yes. Most of it would always help. Now, is it sometimes integral to the development? No. For example, China, where I haven't been, it was really sort of like telling the story of the place and then visually kind of effectively representing what is visual too, which is this area of like rivers and green and all that. The Indigo smoke concentrates on the Lapsang Souchong Accord. And that's the most important thing. So it's a matter of like, what is the most significant thing? If the perfume story that we were talking about, the landscape was the most absolutely important thing, like we really wanted to translate the experience of being there, then I would not work on a perfume that I hadn't visited and hadn't had that experience myself. Where the main significant part is an ingredient that maybe has a connection and a relation to a place, that's different. Venice, yes. Croatia, yes. Almond, Suede, Cordoba, yes. The Mexican perfumes like Anima Dulcis was my thesis project. I've been to that particular abandoned convent many, many times before. I've like seen the construction materials up close. Most of them, I would say, yes.
Okay. Yeah. I like this question because it's not non-perfumey. This is from Cheap Imitation, who says, as an architect, what's your favorite building in NYC?
Oh, Rockefeller Center. As a complex, actually, which is because it's not just one building. Of course, it's really like a little urban complex of a collection of like beautiful. For me, it's like iconic. It's this incredible meeting between Art Deco and then modern architecture, like when it was becoming more kind of like the mid-century modern, right? And this incredible, hopeful moment of skyscrapers piercing the sky. But then done with beautiful design and this Art Deco touch. And it's just like urban, in an urbanistic way. It's interesting spaces. It created a plaza. It has all these like interesting like nooks and crannies that where people kind of engage as you know, just people walking around the city, behave a certain way. And then stylistically and architecturally, they're like just like beautiful buildings with beautiful construction materials. I think the stone used, the concrete used, the fenestration, you know, the windows, it's such a beautiful place. And it's quintessential New York. Nothing, I think nothing can reach that like awe-inspiring, like, oh wow, this is incredible.
You will be aware, you must be aware that perfume prices seem to be going up to astronomical heights at the moment. What are your views on that?
So it goes hand in hand with also a market that is asking for higher concentration, higher performing, longevity, strong perfumes. And people are being, if I may say so, guided by this kind of intention of like, oh, a good perfume is a perfume that is strong and long lasting. And by all means, that's one way to measure a perfume. It's not the only one. I don't think that all strong perfumes are good perfumes. I don't think that all perfumes should be super long lasting. Some perfumes should be refreshing, and some perfumes must be a little bit more ephemeral, and that's the point of them. But I think because we are more global, and because in a way, like now, a lot of segments in the market are influencing each other. There's this functional aspect of like, oh, a perfume, for you to spend money, the perfume should perform this way. And it's a very functional kind of thing, right? It's not a very sort of like, oh, the beauty of perfume is what it is, and that's where the money goes.
But it won't just be that, though, will it? I mean, because we've had like powerhouse perfumes for decades. So what else do you put it down to?
You mean the increasing price itself?
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I think the for sure inflation is a part of it. Like definitely every single, I can tell you as a brand owner who is working on the production and every single aspect of it, the glass is more expensive. Perfume formulas keep being more expensive. Between COVID and now, there were several price increases that were just happening almost every 2 months for existing formulas that were just being like, they became more and more expensive. Certainly the fuel kind of crisis prompted by the war in Eastern Europe.
I mean, we've had other people on this channel as well talking about prices of logistics, costs of logistics, and things like that. Okay, so that's very. I'm going to move us on just because of time.
Yeah.
And as Rachel says here, so many great questions. We need to extend the hour. I'm not going to hold you to a promise here on this channel right now, Carlos.
You can hold me to a promise. I'd be happy to do it for you.
please say that you will come back before too long, not like not leave another
No.
the next interview.
It would be my honor and pleasure, and I can't thank you enough for just this window of time as well. And for me to talk for you.
Thank you very much to all of you for tuning in. I really seriously cannot believe that we're nearly at the 58-minute mark. Thank you very much to all of you for tuning in. Thank you for the questions. We will have Carlos back before too long. But final thought, and you have to answer this one really quickly. If you could go back and give one piece of advice to your, 2010, 2011 self about starting a perfume brand, what would you say? Stay
focused. Stay focused. Don't get overwhelmed with growth. Stay slow and steady beats fast and fast burning. Wow. It's a slow burn is much better than just a instant combustion.
Slow and steady wins the race, I think.
Always.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carlos, and thank you very much all of you for watching. As always, stay tuned to social media for info about other videos coming your way. But for now, thanks very much.
Thank you everyone for tuning in.